Hi there. I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com, and this is my Smart American Accent training. Welcome to our live Friday broadcast where we take your questions about American accent, English pronunciation, intonation, and everything you need to improve your personal and professional communication in American English. Each week we choose a topic and discuss, I give you resources and information about that topic, but you can ask me questions about anything that's regarding American accent. So if you'd like to know about pronunciation, words or sounds that you find difficult, feel free to ask those at any time in the chat. This week we're going to be talking about giving out your personal information, how to make yourself clear when you're giving things like your name, your email address, your phone number, both in person and over the phone. Oftentimes it can be challenging to be well understood by people when you're trying to give them this important information. And if they don't already have your email address or your phone number, it's really critical that they get it correct on the first time, or you won't be able to reconnect with the person. So this is often something that we need to do in our personal life. If you're ever ordering something over the phone, or in our business world, we need to exchange contact information. And so we have some ideas and tips today about pronouncing numbers, about spelling and giving information over the phone using some techniques for that. So I'll be giving you resources and links to speechmodification.com's free lessons and resources, as well as additional videos here on YouTube and Facebook that you can use for this type of thing. Okay, so one of the things we were talking about this week on our YouTube channel in our community page was how we pronounce numbers. And there are some numbers that sound similar to one another, especially over the phone. So if you look at, for example, the numbers 9, 19, and 90, I'm going to talk a little bit about what you need to know when you're pronouncing numbers like that. So it's not just true for 9, it's and 19, it's also true for all of the numbers that have a teen, like 17 versus 70. So what do we need to bear in mind when we're pronouncing numbers like this? So say my address might be 9019. So of course, I always have the option of labeling each number 9019. Very frequently with addresses and phone numbers, we group numbers together to help our listener understand what we're talking about. So when I'm saying 9, there's only one syllable. That's the syllable that gets the stress. It's simple. I just say 9. But when I'm saying 19 versus 90, you can hear how those sound fairly similar. They both have the 9. And so I need to make sure that those two numbers are distinct from one another, 19 and 90. And the main distinction between these two numbers is that when I'm saying 19, I am stressing the second syllable. So 9 is shorter and teen is longer, 19, versus 90, I'm stressing the first syllable, 9, and the T is shorter, the second syllable. So that when I say it like that, 1990, that's also how I would say this date, 1990. I do have several videos describing how we pronounce dates like 2019 or 2019 and some options for that. You can check those out by looking at my channel page, Speech Modification Seattle, and just searching on that number using the search tools, or you can find lessons about it on speechmodification.com as well. But when we're just talking about saying the numbers 19 and 90, when the number has a teen, for example, 15 versus 50, I'm going to stress teen, the second syllable, and when it's 90 or 50, I'm going to stress the first syllable. There are some exceptions to this. If I'm saying, for example, 15 versus 19, I'm going to be stressing the first syllable because the important piece of information that's different is in the 9 or the 5th. If I say 19, 15, then hearing just that teen part makes it more difficult to tell the difference between those two numbers. So 15 and 50, but 15 and 19. Similarly, when I'm counting 16, 17, 18, then I'm equally stressing the first syllable of those numbers. So it's a little bit complicated. I'd say the most important thing for being well understood is noting this distinction between first and second syllable stress so that you can clearly be heard whether you're saying the number 90 or the number 19. You might also notice that in 19, I'm using a clear aspirated T sound, 19. But when I'm saying 90, that T is more of a flap T, and it sounds kind of like D. Sounds almost like I'm saying 90. I can say 90. You will be understood, but most Americans will say it with that flap T, more like 90 or 50. With 50, we actually use the T sound. Versus 19, I'm using the aspirated T because it's at the beginning of the syllable, and the word teen is going to always have that little puff of air. Teen, 19, versus 90 with that flap T. You can find more about how we pronounce T in the middle of words in my videos about American T. Just search on my channel page for American T, and you'll see a series of videos describing how to pronounce T in different contexts. So that's some basics about numbers. And there's more to be thought about when you're talking about numbers. So when you're giving out, for example, your phone number, one thing to bear in mind is how Americans will group the numbers in a phone number. Of course, in different parts of the world, we use different amounts of numbers and patterns for numbers with phone numbers. In the US, we typically have a 3-number area code, which we'll put in digits like that. So here in Seattle, the area code is 206. And then we have 3 digits. So I'll use 555. By the way, that's never going to be an actual number. So you'll maybe notice sometimes in media when they want it to sound like a phone number but not be a real number, they'll use 555. And then 4 digits. So when you're giving your phone number, you want to bear in mind that this is how we would write the phone number, and that you want to group the numbers that way. So for example, in this case, I would say 206 555 1234. So some things to note here. Often we say O instead of 0. It is acceptable to say 206, keeping in mind whichever one you're likely to be more able to pronounce correctly. So if the R in 0 makes it a little bit hard for you to pronounce, or if you notice that the vowel is more difficult there, then using an O for your zeros can be very helpful. I wrote these in 3 separate lines because I had a large pause after each. 206, 555, 1234. Sometimes I have a small pause between the 4-digit number to make sure that my listener can hear all of those numbers. Another way I might be saying a phone number is by grouping these last 2 numbers. So I might say 206, 555, 1234. That's a little less common, and definitely in a combination like 12 and 34, I wouldn't use it. I might be more likely to use it, for example, if it was, I would say we're more likely to use the groupings of numbers in an address, and in a phone number, we're more likely to label out each number. Okay, so we'll come back to talking about numbers in the context of email, giving your email address and your street address in just a minute, but I see we have a question, so I'll go to that next. So the question was, may I ask about how to link ED ending sound to the next word, like I called them or I walked to the market? Great question. So yes, we definitely link between words, and when we have something that has an ED, in the case of called them, and walked to, we do 2 different things. So called, in the word called, the ED says D. So it's actually doesn't have, just has this sound, called, go right from the L to the D, called them. And so what Americans will do when they're linking those two words is that they won't release that D. I won't make a break between called and them. I'll link them. And I do that by not releasing that D. So I will say called them. And so I mark that this way. It's called a stopped D. And it's similar to our stopped T, where I simply don't release the air from the D. I don't say called. I say called them. Sorry, when I say it by itself, I release the D. When I move into the TH, I simply move my tongue from the D position, called them, directly into the TH position. So you won't really hear that D sound, but you need to be careful to actually move your tongue into the position for the D sound, or it'll sound like call them, call them. That will sound like the D is missing. So I say called them. I stop the air with my tongue in the D position and release the air into the th of them, called them. Versus walked to, the ED in the word walked says a T sound because the K is voiceless. So it's not walked, it's walked, walked. And because that KT is a voiceless cluster, I have a tendency to pronounce and release that T, walked to. I can say walk to in the cases of a word that ends with T and the next word starts with a T. Sometimes I'll just say one T sound. For example, went to. I stop that T, went to, and go right into the next two. But I can't do that with walked to, because walk to, if I make only one T sound, I can't hear that I'm saying walked. Then it would sound like walk to, walk to. And so I have to make a T, release that T, and make a separate T, walked to. So that one's a little more cumbersome to say. It's not really linked, basically, in this context. So if I had to summarize a rule for you, when it ends with ED, if it says D and the next word is something like a TH or a T, then I'm going to use a stopped D, called them, called to. And if it ends with ED, but the ED says T, for example, in walked, stopped, left, then I'm going to make a break and I won't be linking. Walked to, left them, etc. So kind of a complex rule, but what's useful to know about is what happens there with the different EDs in past tense. You can find more information about pronouncing ED in past tense in my videos and lessons about past tense. So use either the channel page, Speech Modification Seattle, or speechmodification.com, and you can just use the search tools to type in past tense, and you'll see lessons and videos that explain details like this, as well as taking a look at my linking videos, which are on my intonation playlist and also can be found by searching on linking, both on my website and my channel page. Thank you for the great question. That's a good observation that linking there is a little bit complex. We have another question. Which sentences are more appropriate? These shoes were made for walking on land or water, or these shoes are made for walking on earth or water. So I would say, first of all, using land rather than earth when you're talking about walking on land and water, then you want the contrast. So I wouldn't use the word earth there. And the shoes were made, or versus the shoes are made for walking. The shoes were made for walking is, there's a subtle distinction between those two, but for the most part, you can use them interchangeably. These shoes are made for walking implies that this is what they are for, versus these were made for walking. It just says, can also sort of imply or mean that these were great, these were made for this, implying that not just literally they were made for it, but figuratively they are working out perfectly for both situations. So I would say probably you're going to say these shoes are made for both land and water, to highlight that that's a property of the shoes. Let's see. So Ankit, I don't really understand what your comment means that you're saying you have an MTI problem. So maybe you can let me know in a little more detail what that is. And I will answer your question if it's related to American accent training, but I'm not familiar with the terminology you're using. So let's get back to our topic of giving out information for email, phone number, so people will understand you well. So we talked a little bit about numbers, and we talked a little bit about grouping numbers for giving your phone number. Now I want to talk a little bit about thinking about your listener when you're giving this information. So when you're giving someone your name or your address or your email address, you might want to think about whether there's something unfamiliar that may be unfamiliar to them in those names. So for example, if your first and last name are something that you've noticed Americans can't pronounce correctly, or they ask you to repeat, it might be that they're just very unfamiliar with your name. It comes from your native language and they haven't ever heard it before. They can't picture how that might be spelled or what sounds are in that name. And so in those cases, you're going to have to be giving them more information, spelling out your name, giving them the letters of your name, giving them something else that your name sounds like. Versus if your name is similar to or the same as names that we have in American English, then they're going to have less of a problem visualizing and following along as you're spelling your name. So that's something to think about. That's also true with street names, for example. So even if you live here in the US and you're giving your address, if your street name is something like Main Street or Smith Street, or a name that is in many cities, Oak Street, for example, then most likely people will maybe need you to spell it because of your pronunciation, but they will understand that name. Versus a less common street name. When I was growing up, there was a street nearby called Sylvan Avenue, and that would be something that isn't necessarily found in lots of cities, and people might not be familiar with that. I would need to spell it and be extra clear giving that name. So keeping in mind the audience and what you're starting with for the name is valuable. We'll talk a little bit now about how to spell out your name in a way that's well understood, and making sure that you're pronouncing the American letters in a way that Americans will understand. Thank you, Daniel. I'm glad that my answer was helpful to you, and I'm very happy you mentioned that you're subscribing. Those of you who haven't subscribed, who enjoy these classes, it's a great idea, because then you'll see when I have new videos and when the next live classes are. And of course, you can find that on my channel page, but the subscribers will see a little bit more on their homepage about speech modification and what we're doing. You can also turn on notifications and then set the level of notification that you like, so YouTube will let you know when I have a new video or a new class, a new live class. All right, so another thing to think about is when you're giving out your information, what are the sounds in the address that you're giving? So for example, if you live on 3rd Avenue, thinking about the accent patterns you have in your speech when you're giving your address is going to be very useful. So for many people, words like third are very difficult to say because they have the TH sound, they have that vowel they have a final D sound. That combination, there's many places where you may have an accent error on that. If you aren't sure what your accent errors are, first of all, if you find that people struggle to understand when you're giving this information, then that'll tell you something. But you can also get more detailed information about accent patterns you're likely to have on speechmodification.com. You can look at my overviews of accent, and it'll tell you, based on your native language, these are the sounds and the error patterns that you're likely to have when you're speaking English. So for 3rd Avenue, I may also have issues with the vowel sound in any of the vowels in any word, and then perhaps I have challenges with my V sound, that I have a tendency to do a W sound instead. All of those things you need to keep in mind and have some extra care when we're pronouncing our address. So in this case, for example, say I need to, I give my address as 3rd Avenue. I may also want to spell that. Now, in the case of third, we often write it out with a number. You could say something like third, as in three, Third Avenue. You can also, for example, the earlier example of the street name I gave was Sylvan. So I might say, I might spell it. And this leads me to my next topic of discussion, that when I'm spelling something over the phone or even in person, different letter names sound very similar. So, for example, S is hard for people to tell if I'm saying S or F. And so I may want to say S as in Sam. Then people are familiar with that phrase. They're familiar with the name Sam, and then that helps them tell that you're saying S rather than F. Or if it was First Avenue, I would say F as in Frank. You don't have to use these exact names or these exact ways of giving the letters, but most Americans are familiar with them. Sometimes people also like to use the military letters like Alpha and Bravo, but I would say that Americans are less familiar with military descriptions for letters, and you're better off with names. You can use my video Spelling Over the Phone to tell you which letters and which names you can use. I'll briefly let you know that, for example, C, D, E, G, all of these that have a sound and the E also sound similar over the phone. And so you may be saying, including B, you might say B as in boy, C as in cat, D as in dog, E as in eagle, etc. And another difficult pair are the M and the N letters. Then we often say M as in Mary versus N as in Nancy. If you have difficulty pronouncing any of these, you may want to find an alternative letter. So for example, if you try to say E as in eagle and people can't understand that, you could change it to E as in elephant. It doesn't have to be one particular word. You just want the word to be clear so they know which letter name you're talking about. Over the phone, Americans need to do this as well. We can't tell, even when native speakers are saying it, even when I'm giving my information over the phone, I'm going to say M as in Mary versus N as in Nancy, because M and N, without seeing someone's mouth, are very difficult to tell which sound you're saying, which letter name. So hopefully that will help you. I'm going to give you the link for the free lesson on my website and the video for this one, because I think that this is one of the most useful tools you can learn. Because in any case, you're always going to be having to give people information and spelling things out. And if the spelling doesn't help you, then you have fewer strategies to convey that information over the phone. Many of us use tools online, are typing things in, and can use written communication. And in person, I can also always write out my name, phone number, or email address, but then I have to have the tools available to me for that. So if you find that that's the best strategy for you, carry around a little pad and a pen and hand people your information that way. Of course, we can also, you can get the other person's telephone number and use texting to give information. Many times, once someone has seen your written name or your written address or email address, it's easier for them to understand it and to pronounce it. And so that's a great tool as well, to have a visual. You see that in my classes, I'm always using visuals for various pieces of information, because many people, regardless of their native language, regardless of pronunciation or accent, are visual learners. They're going to take in the information better if you pair some visual information with what you're telling them and what you're speaking about. So the lesson here on speechmodification.com is mostly about spelling over the phone and gives you some more details, similar to what I was just saying in class here. So I want to wrap it up there for today. We will be back again next Friday and talking about another topic for pronunciation of American English. Check in with our channel page and take part in our polls, answering questions and getting information. I always like to highlight some of the resources that I have and to find out what topics are most interesting to you. So Thank you so much for your questions today. If you're watching this not as the live broadcast, you can leave your questions in the comments, and you can leave comments and questions on any of my videos and on my website. I really appreciate your input because it helps me decide and know what information is most useful for you. There's lots and lots of great information out there, but sometimes it's challenging to know how it applies to you, how to use it for practical, real-life speaking tasks, and so I try to focus on that for you. I will also remind you that many of the resources on my website, speechmodification.com, are free and available to you, and I do also have very inexpensive online courses that help you sort through all of the information and learn which steps to do first when you're working on improving your pronunciation and your American accent. So thank you so much for being a part of class today. I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com. Remember, if you want to sound American, you can do it. speechmodification.com.